Andrew Kirkland. I'm currently doing my Master's of Public Health while doing a dietetic internship at Samford University. I graduated with my bachelor's way back in the day in 2014 from Mississippi State University. I'm a Birmingham boy, born and raised. I actually grew up in a small town a little north of here called Locust Fork. I don't know if anybody knows where that is, but if you blink, you miss it. Before I went to school, I actually worked at UAB in the Women's and Infant Center as an infant nutrition technician, and I love that job. And I definitely think that helped me get into the dietetic internship. So today we're going to talk about fats, cholesterol, and heart health, which is a super important topic, I believe. And you notice that fats is plural, and that's because what we're going to go through today is we're going to introduce the different types of fat and why it's very important to kind of pay attention to which ones we're actually consuming. So there we go. So presentation outline, it's going to be 3 parts. In part 1, we're going to kind of go back and forth between fats and cholesterol, because what I want to do, I just want to make sure that we're getting familiar with the different terms that we're going to be using in the rest of the presentation, just so that everybody's on the same page and you kind of know what we're talking about. So we're going to talk about the types and the roles of fat, and then the types and the roles of cholesterol. And then part 2, what we're going to do, we're going to bring those 2 things together and talk about what happens when fat and cholesterol interact in our bodies. And that's going to lead into part 3, how that's going to affect our heart health. And then I'm going to give some recommendations on how we can improve, either maintain or treat for heart health. So let's start off with fats, okay? So when you see these 2 pictures, I think it's very interesting because it shows 2 completely different worlds of fat. And I have a feeling that a lot of people, when we think of fat, we think of the top picture. We think of, the meats and the cheese and the hot dogs and the French fries. And that is kind of what our idea of fat. But in reality, the bottom picture, you look at that and you think, oh, well, that's healthy. Well, that's also another representation of fat. So fat is a macronutrient. And there's 3 main macronutrients. So we have protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And so the way that I like to explain it is protein basically is the frame of the car. And then carbohydrates and fat are the gas that makes the car move. So your sources of energy or fuel is your carbohydrates and your fat. And fat's going to be that quicker burning. Your body likes to break down that fat for a quick burst of energy. So there's 4 types of dietary fat. Dietary fat is just the fat that you consume in the food that you eat. We're also going to talk about another type of fat later. But the 4 types of dietary fat is going to be trans fat. We're not going to focus a whole lot on that today. And that's because government regulations kind of limit the amount of trans fat that's going to be in our food. You'll still notice it on the nutrition label. And so if you ever see that it contains some, you really want to be careful with that because trans fat is not good for you. But like I said, government regulations kind of mainly keeps that out of our foods right now. Saturated fats, now this is going to be one that we really focus on. And then you have 2 types of unsaturated fats, which are going to be monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. So now we're going to jump over to cholesterol. So cholesterol is a waxy substance that's found in animal-based foods that we eat, but it's also in our body cells. So cholesterol is actually produced in the liver. And one thing that's super important about cholesterol to note is that the body produces the cholesterol it needs. Well, what does that mean? That means that you don't have to consume your cholesterol. Your body isn't asking you, it's like, hey, I need more cholesterol. No, your body's making all of the cholesterol that it needs to use for what it needs it for. That doesn't mean that you cannot eat cholesterol. Your body does have a buffer system where it can tolerate some cholesterol intake, but it doesn't actually need any cholesterol because it makes it itself. So as I said, it's going to come from food products derived from animals, meat, poultry, dairy, and there's 2 main types of cholesterol. We're going to talk more about it in just a minute, but it's going to be your high density lipoprotein, HDL, and your low density lipoprotein, or your LDL. And I'm sure if you've ever had a blood test before, you've seen those 2 things listed on it. And so our bodies do need cholesterol to function normally, because cholesterol in the body is used to make hormones and vitamin D, and it also plays a role in digestion. So cholesterol, it's gotten a bad rap, because it can cause the problems, but it does do things in your body that's actually beneficial. So what kind of things affect cholesterol levels, or what predisposes us to having higher cholesterol levels? Well, there's actually a lot of things. Number one is going to be genetics, okay, as in a lot of things, like diabetes or hypertension or things like that. And so if you do have high cholesterol that runs in your blood, then this is something that you are going to want to watch, because it can be genetic. Also age, as we age, our cholesterol levels will rise. There are medicines that will contribute to higher cholesterol as well. Namely, that's going to be your beta blockers, your diuretics, and then like your corticosteroids. And then the next three things are kind of going to be what we really focus on in this presentation. And that's going to be the diet, activity level, and obesity. So for the diet, consuming high quantities of saturated and trans fat can raise the bad kinds of cholesterol we're going to talk about in just a second, as can obesity. And then with physical activity can help to raise the good type of cholesterol levels. And then the last one's going to be tobacco use. Tobacco use actually decreases the good type of cholesterol and increases the bad types of cholesterol. And the link between smoking and high cholesterol is greater for women. We're not going to focus too much on tobacco use, but I will say that there are resources for you that you can reach out through Employee Wellness. You can find out what these resources are that can help you quit smoking if that's something that you wish to do. So now, saturated fats and triglycerides. So saturated fats, the general rule for them are that they're going to be solid at room temperature. And so what I always think of when I think of this is growing up in rural Alabama, my grandmother and aunts, they always had this pot of oil that they kept on the stove that they would put their bacon grease and everything, and they would spoon it out and put it in their cooking. And so just think about that, where that's solid, when it cools down, and your body can't break that down super well. And that's kind of why we're watching out for these type of fat, because when we consume a lot of fat, or foods containing a lot of fat, like I said, your body's going to use it for energy. But then if we are consuming more than what we're expending, then our body's going to end up storing this fat. Well, so first of all, saturated fats are going to mainly come from animal sources. A lot of what we eat of saturated fat comes from animal sources. Also, fried foods, palm oil, coconut oil, so your tropical oils. And so basically what happens is when you eat this saturated fat, it tells the liver, say, hey, I produce more cholesterol. And it doesn't make the good type when this happens either. And so, like I was just saying, though, the saturated fats, if you're not using it for energy, then you're storing it as body fat. Well, that's going to be in the form of triglycerides, which is going to be the most common type of fat in the body. And this is the storage of excess fat intake. So now let's focus on HDL and LDL for just a second. I want you to look at this picture. So HDL, remember, that's high density lipoprotein. So I want you to think high density. That means that it's got some weight to it. And so that means it's really able to kind of push through your veins and kind of flow on its own. And so H is for healthy, okay? And think of them as kind of like the police officers. This is the regulation cholesterol that makes sure that it's just kind of flowing through, and it's making sure that there's not too much of its little brother, I guess you would say, in the blood. because the LDL is for lousy. This is going to be the bad protein. So think of the low density. So the high density is going to be able to flow. Well, the low density is just kind of like hitting off of the walls, right? And what happens is it will stick to the side of your artery walls. So when you actually get a buildup of all this LDL that's just kind of sticking to the walls, this can cause a narrowing of your arteries to where the blood is not going to have as much room to flow through. And this is going to be called atherosclerosis. But so when this LDL is sticking to the sides of the wall, what's supposed to happen is the HDL is supposed to come in and grab it off and take it back to the liver. So when your levels of each are kind of equal, your HDL is higher than your LDL, then you're not really going to have a whole lot of problems, because the HDL is going to be go and say, hey, let's get back to the liver, you know. So it's not allowing for this plaque buildup. Okay, so now we're moving into the second part. So fat and cholesterol together. So what we're going to do is kind of talk you through a process. Okay, so high saturated fat intake that we talked about. So your fat intake is exceeding the amount of energy expenditure. And so what's going to happen? Well, you're going to store that fat. So your triglyceride level is going to go up. But also remember that we talked about how saturated fat tells the liver, hey, I need more cholesterol. So then it starts producing this cholesterol, but it's not producing the HDL, it's producing the LDL. So increased fat storage, cholesterol production. So all of a sudden your levels of triglycerides, LDLs are going up. And it's important to note that your body isn't compensating for the partnership between triglyceride and LDL. What I mean by that is just because your body makes more LDL doesn't mean that it's automatically going to say, hey, we need more HDL too. No, it's just going to keep making the HDL at the same level that it always has. But then all of a sudden your LDL production is going to be getting much higher. And so when that happens and your triglycerides are high, your LDL is high, and your HDL is still staying low, then there's not enough of that regulation. The HDL is not in your bloodstream making sure that it's bringing all this excess, because there's not enough of it. And so then that's when we get this narrowing of the arteries, called atherosclerosis. And also, you know, your veins and your arteries become rigid. And the space that the blood has to flow through is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, because this triglyceride and the LDLs are just sticking to the walls. Well, what happens is when this happens and you get a clump of blood that's trying to flow through, and all of a sudden there's not enough room, it can't get through. And so your artery becomes completely blocked with a blood clot. And then this is where increased risk of heart disease, heart attack, and stroke comes in. And so as you can see, that this becomes a very insidious process, but it starts with this increased fat intake, and it just slowly gets to this very bad place that we definitely want to avoid. So the third part of this presentation, I'm going to focus mainly on fats. And the reason for that is because it's going to be much easier to monitor your cholesterol intake, because you know where the cholesterol is coming from. It's going to come from meat sources. And if you are monitoring your fat intake and the types of fat that you're eating and how much fat you're eating, you will therefore be also monitoring your cholesterol intake. And so I love this from the American Heart Association, the Facts on Fats. And so it really talks to love it, limit it, and lose it. And so you can definitely read some of that, because the unsaturated is what we want more of. The limited is what we want less of. And then your trans fat, we don't want any of it. So let's talk about unsaturated fats. Okay, so if you remember with saturated fats, we talked about that typically they're going to be solid at room temperature. Well, that means your unsaturated fats are going to be liquid at room temperature. So think of your canola oil, your olive oil, things like that. And just like because they're solid, the saturated fats are going to be harder for your body to break down and use it for energy. Because these are liquid, your body's going to be able to break these down more easily and kind of use them for what it needs to, instead of just automatically storing it. So polyunsaturated fats, these are going to be the omega-3 fats that I'm sure that everybody has heard a whole lot of. Well, this is very important because these omega-3 fats perform some very important things within your body, such as brain and nervous system functions, regulating those things. They support heart health and they reduce inflammation. But what's important to note is that your body doesn't automatically produce these fatty acids the same way that they do cholesterol. And so your body actually needs you to consume these omega-3 fatty acids to be able to help with what it's supposed to do. So some sources of these are going to be your fatty fish, your walnuts. Fatty fish are going to be like salmon, mackerel, walnuts, flaxseed, which, flaxseed can be quite hard, but you can get ground flaxseed and you can put it on your oatmeal or your salad or something like that. Chia seed and eggs. And you're like, wait, eggs is a meat source. Well, we're not going against meat sources here. But some eggs also, you'll see on the packaging to where it will mention that the chickens were fed a diet high in omega-3s, and so that's going to even increase the content of those fatty acids in the eggs. So then you have your monounsaturated fat. So they're going to increase the HDL levels. So polyunsaturated tends to reduce total cholesterol levels, period, but your monounsaturated is going to increase that good cholesterol levels, which, remember, that's what we want. We need that regulation because cholesterol is not bad, just the LDL that we're really watching. And the sources of this is going to be nuts, oil, avocado, super good fat, and peanut butter. Obviously, the reason that the asterisk is beside the peanut butter is because we do need to monitor our peanut butter intake, because it's super easy to just keep going to the jar, because peanut butter is awesome, but it will add up pretty quickly. But a little bit of peanut butter will go a long way. Okay, so now we're going to go to brass tacks, the bottom line. Recommendations from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics says that unsaturated fats should account for 20 to 35% of your daily caloric intake. And saturated fat should account for less than 10% of daily caloric intake. So that means for a 2,000 calorie diet, that's approximately 11 to 13 total grams a day of the saturated fats. And so another thing to note is if something is high in saturated fat, it's probably going to be high in something else that your body doesn't need a whole lot of, such as sodium or sugar. Okay, and so we want to limit processed foods and meats, which are going to be high in saturated fat, but also high in sodium and sugar. Limit fast food, same reasons. And also limit refined grains. So your white flour, your white rice, your white bread. What I say is think wheat, not white. And the reason for that is because these refined grains, they have removed the part of the grain containing the fiber and the B vitamins that your body needs. And they do that to make it a smoother texture, but they're taking away a lot of the good stuff for your body. And also this can cause digestive issues as well. So, okay, what else can I do? Okay, so if I'm cutting all this stuff out, well, what am I replacing it with? Well, whole fruits and vegetables are going to be super good. I always like to highlight the non-starchy vegetables because, it's a two birds, one stone kind of thing. Because the different colors of these vegetables are going to provide different nutrients that your body needs. And also whole grains. We talked about what refined grains are. Well, this is what we want to eat more of with the whole grains. So the barley, the brown rice, the oatmeal. And you're like, wow, this is all of a sudden turning into just a general nutrition consultation, but that's not true. We're still talking about heart health and cholesterol. And the thing about it is these products right here, the whole fruits and vegetables and the whole grains, they're going to contain something called plant sterols and stanols. And eating foods rich in these substances may help combat rising total and LDL, the bad cholesterol levels. And so that's why these things are important. And also one other source that would be good, maybe that we can go to because we want to make sure that we are eating, plenty of macronutrients that we talked about. Well, a lot of times our protein is going to come from meat sources. And so if we are reducing the meat that we're eating, so let's try to look at eating some more beans or even tofu if you like tofu. So we're getting close to the end. I definitely advocate for becoming a label reader. And one thing I definitely want to point out is do not just look from the calories down, because when we do that and we're like, oh, wow, that's not too bad. But you cannot assume that the numbers represent the entire package. Okay, so you definitely want to pay attention to the serving size, because if you're eating more than the serving size, then you're going to be eating more than the numbers that are shown there. Because I remember growing up as a kid, I loved Vienna sausages. And I looked at it one day and noticed that the can of Vienna sausages is actually 2.5 servings, and so that's definitely going to change your numbers. So really be watching for the total fat, but then also look at where that fat is coming from. So final suggestions for a healthy heart. We keep coming around to this, but this is super important. You need to drink more water. Water does a whole lot of things in your body. It protects against dehydration, which can cause a lot of problems itself. It regulates body temperature, it lubricates joints, and it helps remove waste from the body. And you remember that cholesterol also helps in digestion. So you really want to drink the water just to make sure that everything's flowing and everything's pushing through the way that it should. And then also, we want to focus on physical activity. And one point that I will always say whenever I talk about physical activity is anything is better than nothing. Don't be the person that says, okay, well, I don't have 20, 30 minutes or 45 minutes to work out, so I can't do anything. This comes down to doing what you can, whether it's parking a little bit further in the parking lot, so you got to walk a little further, whether it's taking an extra flight of stairs, it's doing what you're able to do. Just getting that heart pumping just a little bit extra, and then working up, finding places where you can do more physical activity. That's what it's all about. It's definitely not an all or nothing. It's just what you can do. Let's do something. So thank you guys for attending this seminar. I do hope it helped you in some way. And so now I'll open up the floor for questions.